Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Beast Must Die. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, let's focus on Frances' sides of things. Obviously, she's kind of cemented in her mind. I wasn't really 100% sure whether she was still on board with the whole, killing George thing, but it's like, no, she is. She's just not sure about the method. Because I guess training with a gun and stuff like that probably also having to wait so long for stuff like that. It's like, she can't even hit the target, so getting perfected enough to be able to kill the target from far away, all that's going to take time, so she's trying to figure out a method of actually killing him. And interestingly enough, she actually gets the idea when they're on their yacht, after the party and everything. Once again, it seems like she's helping out Philip because it's as a mother, and, maybe, she's filling that void to a certain extent. But it's not like she's trying to replace Marty, but I think, on some level, it's if I'm helping Philip, it connects that, it plays into those mother instincts that she has. But then again, it is the thing of, I keep always going back and forth over, and, no, I do believe it is more so she is using Philip. Philip is the easiest way in to get to George. And so she's trying to, mend their relationship, so I guess so she comes off a little bit better, and it lets George kind of let his guard down a little bit. So it's that much easier for her to kind of sneak in close as she hit him with, stabs him with the knife in a metaphorical sense. If she could literally, I'm sure she would, but, it's obviously just more metaphorical in this regard. But what I think is so fascinating is, on the boat and everything, she's looking, boom, 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 piecing together, all right, this is, okay, that could be this, I could do this, I could do that. She's plotting out how she's going to do it, which I also think is ironic, considering Philip is oh, hey, I could be your researcher on how to kill somebody. It's I think he's going to kill his dad. The fact is he's secretly got the knife. It's going to be interesting, because I think there's literally two people, maybe three, if you count Lena, that want him dead. I mean, the irony would be if literally the entire family wants him dead, because his sister's not the biggest fan of him to a certain extent. He's not the biggest fan of his sister. Violet might be kind of keeping the front of I love him and everything, but maybe she secretly hates him. Maybe she knows everything. Lena has her issues with him. So it's I think secretly everyone in that family wants him dead. So Frances will actually be doing them a favor, but that might be actually the twist to this, is that one of them is going to end up killing Philip, and it's not going to be Frances, and it's who done it? It might shift into that. I'm not saying that because I've seen, it's just the little breadcrumbs they've been setting up of just like I said, they hint to kind of everyone in his family hating him. Especially, I definitely feel more so if anyone's going to do it, it's probably going to be Philip. But I'm thinking Lena has enough motive. I think Violet, there's enough buried there for her to want to do it. I think Joy hates her brother enough to be I'm going to get him out of the way because he sucked. I don't know. But there's also the thing of it seems like she loves her brother too, but at times it feels like she's very indifferent towards him, so we'll see. But it definitely leans towards Philip potentially killing him, but it's like I said, there's enough people here with motive, at the very least someone other than Frances. At the bare minimum, it's Philip. At most, it's probably the rest of the family too, but we'll see. So, it's just ironic that he's giving her ideas on murders, let me be a researcher for your murders for your book, but I'm well, he's probably giving you a whole bunch of good ideas of poisons and stuff like that, but it's nah, you can't use anything, because if George miraculously dies from said ways that that Philip suggested to her for her book, it's going to make her look super suspicious, so it's no, can't let that happen. But she's got it cemented in her mind how she's going to do it. She's going to use it with the whole boat, so she wants to take George out, and it's I could show you how to sail, and we could get my certificates, or I could actually take you out. But she's no, you go with Philip, which that works out to her favor too, because Philip, she shows Philip the run of things, even basically showing him how she's going to kill his father by being oh, now this, be careful, I'm not one for taking risks and stuff like that. So she had Philip lie down to see it, and she's oh, that's cool, right? Well, things could kind of go wrong on a boat, but it's oh, that thing going wrong, I'm purposely making it happen because I'm going to hit your father, knocking him unconscious so that basically falls into the water and most likely drowns. I guess you can make it seem like an accident. That's still going to be a whole investigation. I don't know what she plans on doing in the aftermath. Is she going to make it seem like he went out on a boat alone and there was an accident? I'm sure there would have been plenty of cameras that would have caught you, so maybe she hasn't thought that far ahead, but maybe it is simply oh, it's going to look like an accident. I couldn't get in to save him, yada, yada, yada. I don't know. Later on, that won't well, because of later parts of this episode, that isn't a viable option of making it seem like, oh, an accident. It's like, no, it's going to look pretty meditated, made to look like an accident. We'll get into that later, but when we get to Nigel's side of things. But I found that whole situation so fascinating, and obviously the moment initially when it's like Philip's going and on about how amazing she is, and it's like, oh, and also he has to hold back his like anger towards his dad because he's like, oh, you might learn a thing or two, and he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I mean, because you getting to do something you don't know. He's like, oh, and what exactly you're saying I don't know, and like you could tell Philip was kind of like biting his tongue not to say anything because he's trying to pretend like everything's okay. And so it was kind of a thing of, oh, let's all go out there. Isn't this going to be amazing? And obviously Philip had an opportunity to show off. It did work in the advantage of it's making him and Philip get closer. But then Philip's like, yeah, Francis, it's all about not taking risks. And he's like, really? And he's looking at Francis because it's like, right. Well, like literally last episode or episode before last, whichever one, you are telling me all about how you're ready to, you live for taking risks. So that little contradiction kind of get George's attention. Joy's definitely looking at her like, I don't know about you. But then later on she says an interesting line of like, yeah, I was actually wrong about her. I thought she was looking at you like she wanted to kind of hook up with you or something like that. But it's like, no, she doesn't look at you that way. And it's like, well, what way does she look at me like? And I love that line from Joy. Lunch. I'm like, oh, that's good. Because it's like, oh, it's like the metaphor in this case would be like the lion stalking the gazelle or a shark smelling blood in the water. I think that might be a more apt description considering like the whole thing is to kind of kill him in the water. So, I wonder, is there also supposed to be some level of irony behind it? That like something swinging that fast hits him and makes him fling and fall into the water. Just like what kind of happened to Marty. It's not a 1-for-1, but I'm like, is there some parallel in that kind of using a vehicle, it's a boat, to kill him, whereas like he used a vehicle to kill your son? Once again, I don't think George did it. There might be either someone else was behind the wheel, whether it was Violet, whether it was I don't think he's actually the one that was behind the wheel at the time. I think he covered it up, sure, but I don't think he's actually the one responsible for killing Marty. I'm kind of leaning towards, I think it might have been Violet. I think she might have, because that might kind of coincide a little bit with like why she's also being like, oh yeah, I have no idea why his shoulders hurt. Like, because it's kind of implying like, oh, like George might have been in the vehicle alone. Maybe it was Joy, but I feel like it might have actually been Violet. I think she might have been in a car. She might have actually been the one driving at the time. And maybe that has something to do with it. So once again, I'm throwing it out there, these early like thoughts and stuff like that about potentially where this could go, but I could easily be wrong. I'm fine with being wrong, but these are just kind of like current theories kind of floating in my head. So she is going to get George by himself though, because she's like, right, we could do she ends up convincing him of like, oh, let's do a one-on-one, and he's like, all right, fine, because she's like, cool, just let me check the weather and stuff like that. So we have the setup on that front. On the other side of things, Nigel's kind of getting grilled because it turns out Shannon's sister was recording their conversation. So it's like, oh, she was kind of using you as leverage in her like suit against the police department, which he was like, I'm literally told her not to do it. Yeah, we talked for like 10 minutes the first time, the second time for a couple hours and blah, 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 blah. It's like, next time, be more careful when you're around her. And so the whole thing is sent him kind of spiraling a little. Well, at one point, he's like watching George because George is like, like his suspect now after looking into Garrity and stuff like that. And so ultimately, he ends up seeing Francis leaving with like Philip in the car and like, wait, what? Let me see where this car has been all over the place. Like, so he's trying to figure out what Francis has been doing since she got to the island. He's leaving it up to Asha to look into that stuff because she's the only person in the department he really trusts. And he ends up bringing her in there when he's talking to Nikki, trying to figure out, like, okay, so what kind of car did George drive? Like, okay, cool. There's a car he has that isn't on the property anymore that disappeared roughly around that time. But then, like, Asha's kind of nervous because it's like, right, we're not following the most direct procedurals on handling this. And then Nikki kind of is like, oh, and he slams the table and it kind of triggers Nigel, and he kind of goes into panic mode a little bit, and just like, he's just, no, I'm fine. He ends up tracking down his therapist. Is like, right, the cracks are getting worse. I'm scared because he's afraid that like if things kind of get worse, he might fall apart. Like once again, I don't know whether it's something connected to what happened to Shannon or whether it's just in general, like, I don't know, like, I'm going to fall apart. I'm not going to be able to piece myself back together, like, if things kind of keep this up. But he's like, right, I'll be there for you, but this isn't your time. He kind of needs it now, but it's like, I'm assuming that's his therapist's partner, maybe. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's a family member, but I would just assume, you know, I mean, it's, you know, assume he makes an asshole out of you and me, right? So maybe, but I just assume, like, oh, is that supposed to be his partner? But it's like, right, but at the very least, I have someone that I need to take care of that comes first. It's their time, not yours. Don't kind of step on their time. So, and I think Nigel kind of feels like a dick, not realizing, like, oh, right, so this is why you needed to take time away from being my therapist, and I kind of made it all about me when you do have stuff of your own you're dealing with. So I think he kind of felt like a dick. Rightfully so. He kind of went off on the therapist last episode, and it's like, right, you actually, you know, because he was legitimately like, I don't think I can give you what you need, but, you know, Nigel's willing to kind of give it another shot because he's desperate, because it's like, right, with everything kind of he starts falling apart even more so over the episode. He's getting drunk. He ends up calling Shannon's sister back, and she's kind of apologizing. It's like, right, you were kind of saying no, but then you came to London and talked to me, so I'm sorry. He's like, oh, so you're basically saying, you're not really sorry. You said it yourself. You said it was basically my fault. And in his drunken anger and just dysfunction, he kind of went off on basically saying, like, because at first it's like, he's like, if that's the case, like, why'd you sleep with me? And she's like, why'd you sleep with me? So he's like, was it your way of trying to get closer to, like, no, I think he had suggested, like, was it your way to try to get closer to my sister? Because I forgot if she suggested it for him. Yeah, she had suggested it for him first, like, oh, like, maybe you slept with me because it was your way to get closer to my sister. He's like, why would I do that? She's like, I was using you for the same thing. You were the last person to be with her and everything, so on some level, it was, like, kind of keeping her alive to a certain extent. But he was like, the fact of the matter is, why would I sleep with you just because I didn't even like your sister? I mean, she was a fine detective and all that, but the fact of the matter is she was always so willing to go above and beyond, like, to try and fit in with other people, and just, like, Shannon's sister's, like, breaking down upon hearing all of this, but he's just kind of like, because for him it's like, the only reason why I have any connection to your sister is this, like, terrible thing that happened. Because basically he was even saying, like, oh, like, you had sex with me because I was close to your sister. What about the two detectives or two cops that knocked down the door before me and your sister went in? Are you gonna fuck them too? And it's like, Jesus. Like, once again, he was just spiraling and he was lashing out. Obviously thinking back to the Shannon thing. We still are only getting fragments of what went down, but I just think it's so amazing that he's just like, like I said, he's just spiraling and falling apart. And then when we kind of cut back to him later on, he had cut his hand. There's a little cut across his face. He's broken glass, like, I guess, like, he was raging out to his music, trying to drown out, like, the memories and everything that he was feeling. Like, he's trying to put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. But Asha hits him up and is like, yo, here, basically where that car you were wondering about, here it is, like, these are the places. And then he starts taking note of every place, basically following where Francis had gone. So he goes to, like, right where the accident where Marty, the hit and run with Marty happened. And so he ends up trailing back, and he finds the guy that led Francis to Lena, and it's like, he ends up contacting Francis, like, I know what you're up to. He didn't get into the specifics of it with Francis to let her, but he did just say in general, we failed you, I get it, I get why you're doing what you're doing, but what you think was going to happen, you want to get there and gather the evidence you needed and give it to us? And she pauses, and I think that's so interesting that Nigel didn't immediately even go there, like, oh, you're just doing this to gather evidence. It didn't cross his mind of, like, who knows? Maybe that was initially her intention. Maybe that's what she was going to do. Maybe it was just the satisfaction of knowing, like, I know who did it, and it turned into, I'm gonna murder him. Like, I don't think she had any clear intent, or maybe the intention always was, I'm going to find him and I'm gonna murder him. Like, who knows? It's hard to say. We're not clear cut into, because I think even Frances herself wasn't 100% sure what she'd do when she kind of figured it all out. She was just kind of, I mean, it was like one immediate, like, instinct reaction after the other of just kind of like, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do this. I'm going to investigate this myself because the cops aren't doing what they needed to. Because basically Nigel's saying, like, the longer you stay there, the more you're compromising any evidence I could use to actually bring him down. The fact of the matter is, like, I think you're right that this is the guy, but let me do my job. I won't let him get away with what he's done. I need you to get out of that house, you know? Once again, it's like reminding her, like, I know you have no reason to trust me, but please trust that we will do this. We won't let him get away with what he did. you know. But for Francis, that's not enough, because despite any of Nigel's, it's like, because I don't want him just to go to jail. It's not just about that. It's like, right, a life for a life. He killed my son. I'm going to kill him. It's only in her what. It's because I think it's for her. It's like, if he goes to jail, it's not going to be enough. Because I think she thinks by killing him, it's going to, like, I don't know if she thinks that, or whether she doesn't, it doesn't matter. Whether it does fix me, whether she thinks it will, or maybe she knows it won't. You know, that's the whole thing about revenge. Like, it doesn't always work out. You know, when you're planning revenge, dig a grave, not only for the person you're trying to get revenge against, but yourself, because it's always going to be, revenge is a double-edged sword like that. But maybe it's just the fact that she doesn't care. She's like, right, the cops are looking into this. I need to make my move now, because if the cops get their opportunity, he's just going to get locked up. And even if he does, like, who's to say he's not, just because of the system of everything, he'll have an opportunity to kind of fight it and go to jail. So it's like, no, I need to take my time now, because I'm going to be judge, jury, and execution in this. I believe I found him. And so Nigel ends up taking all of this, and he goes to his superior about, like, right, Garrity, and about Francis finding out about him. So it is a situation of, this is what's kind of being presented, ma'am. And so once again, it is that, like, British thing, like, with an accent, because that came up about, God, I'm blanking on his name, because he was in the show Bodyguard, and there was a whole thing about, like, how he says mom is, like, it sounds like mom. And I can still hear it, like, with the British accent, with certain British dialects and accents, it sounds like mom. Like, it's like, can I have a word, mom? Like, you're saying ma'am, but I completely had forgotten about that. That was a whole thing. Regardless, it just made me remind me of that. I still need to watch that show. I never have. I kind of got spoiled on the ending of it, but I'm still interested in checking the show out. I've just never checked it out. That Bodyguard limited series. Regardless, tangents and all that aside. What I thought was interesting, though, like, the other dude, the kind of, like, the cop that, like, Nigel's been, like, talking to from time to time, it's like, he gets brought in as, like, their superior officer. She's, like, asking questions, and it's like, he's like, honestly, at the time, I didn't think much of it until afterwards, until Strangeway started asking about the surveillance for, like, footage for stuff like that, because he was initially supposed to talk to George. George filed missing car thing, but then the moment he brought it up to Garrity was like, nah, it's okay, it's good, just forget it, it was a mistake. It's like, now, at the time, he didn't think much of it, because it's like, but now he's like, no, I realized, like, right, there was something shady going on there. So now it's like, you know, even the entire department's on it now. It's like, right, we failed before, but we have been given an opportunity to set this right. So Nigel's like, all right, fact of the matter is, everything we've got on George is circumstantial. We're going to go after him, like, tomorrow, or like a day or tomorrow, like, whatever the time frame was at the time. Like, it would be the day after Frances is already, like, left with him to, you know, commit her murder. But interestingly enough, it's like, right, like, we need to find out something about this car. Like, we're going to bring him in, but we need to get as much ammunition as we can to use against him when we interrogate him, like, when we bring him in. So it's like, yeah, but what about the car? Like, he might have gotten it off the island. And then we look at all, like, you know, maybe he used the ferry to get it off the island or whatever. The fact of the matter is, we need to find something to kind of arm ourselves to use against him. And it's like, Frances said that she'd kind of, you know, leave tomorrow and leave and, you know, let us handle it, so let's not let her down again. So, and that cop in particular, he's kind of, like, frustrated, because, like, all the fault kind of falls on him more so than anything, because he didn't question things at the time. So, plus, like, you could tell, like, Nigel's rubbing him super the wrong way, because it's like, oh, like, everything I'm doing is, like, you just point out my failures time and time again, so I'm sure that's frustrating on his part. But, we didn't touch on any more of Shannon's sister this episode, so I'm curious if there's going to be more with that next episode. I'm assuming so. But I love that you have George sneaking away, and then, like, Violet's awake, and then we see someone looking out the window. You'd assume it's Violet, but, like, that could be a multitude of people. Once again, that kind of leads me to think, someone's going to follow them and probably find out about what Francis is up to. I think so. I don't know if she's going to try and kill him and it's not going to work out. Like, maybe it's like, oh, whoa, her attempt to try and murder him, like, ends up failing because he ends up dodging. It's like, well, that was close. And it's like, or something. Or maybe during the boat ride, some information comes up that makes her think, like, whoa, you didn't do it. Because she is drinking a little bit, trying to, I think, give herself the liquid courage necessary to pull this off. That, or maybe she just can't do it at the end of the day. I don't know. I'm so curious to see how that plays out. Because, once again, this is the AMC version of it, so there's 2 episodes left instead of 1. So there's still a lot of room for this to kind of play out. So, it's not going to go the way she wants it to. But I'm like, who was it that followed her? Like, was it Violet, suspicious, thinking of something's happening between George and her? Was it Lena, kind of for a similar reason? Was it Joy? Was it, I doubt it's Philip, but you never know. Was it the maid? I'm like, once again, the butler / maid did it. Obviously, it's more so the butler did it, but you kind of think in that regard it could be like the maid did it as well. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, not in the sense of like the Marty thing of just like, oh, like, she might be suspicious and was ordered to follow them for whatever reason, Somebody most likely followed them, and it's just kind of like, I don't think that's going to go the way Francis hoped. Like I said, someone might have just followed them there and saw them leave together, so that might hamper, and by the time they come back, whoever it is confronts them, because like I said, I don't think everything's going to go down the way Francis is kind of hoping. Once again, we shall see. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.